Morning, church. Happy July. I don't know if that's a thing or not, but hopefully you all had a good 4th of July for those of you who celebrated by watching fireworks or visiting family. And hopefully God has been helping you see things a little differently as we've spent a lot of time talking about having the eyes to see where God has placed you, when He has placed you, and what He's called you to do with the people around you. We haven't said it in a while, but we really try to practice the principle of being the and, loving God and loving others. It's extremely scriptural. It starts in Genesis chapter 1 and ends in Revelation. God trying to bring about humanity, this weird, odd creation that's not animal and it's not God, but yet it is both. And we hold this tension. And in this tension, God calls us to do two things, which are really one: love Him, love others. And this series we've been about in this summer, called Know Thy Neighbor, is trying to help us to rethink or to be renewed in our minds about how we see people around us. I want to ask you a question. It's kind of an odd question, but and maybe a hard question. Who in your life can come to your house and just walk in and be welcomed? Who in your life can just show up at your house, maybe knock on the door if it's locked, but if it's not locked, could walk into your house and you would be happy to see them? You would be fine with them being there, whatever condition your house is in. And within reason, whatever condition you're in. Who in your life can you just show up to their house and walk in and be welcomed? Do you have people in your life like this that maybe aren't biologically related to you? I think about my life. I've been spending a lot of time doing exactly what we've been asking you to do. Think about where God has placed me, when He has placed me, who is around me. And there really, I don't know, and Jill can attest to this, I don't think there's a day that goes by that somebody isn't knocking on my door. And when I say knocking on the door, I don't just mean Amazon, here's some stuff, okay? But I mean somebody wanting to come in my house. And they're usually shorter than this table, all right? There's always kids coming to my house going, hey, can Sky play? Hey, can Jace play? There's no one ever asking for Tice to play. But they're always asking for Jace. In fact, yesterday, this is hilarious, right? So yesterday, I went out on a bike ride. I got home from my bike ride, and it's just after lunchtime. And I'm trying to I've eaten some food, and I'm winding down, and I hear the doorbell ring. I'm in the bathroom, and I don't really hear anybody answer the door, but that doesn't mean it doesn't get answered. And so I finish getting dressed. I kind of walk out. I'm kind of looking through the house, and I'm like, I know somebody was at the door. And before I check the cameras to see who it was, I hear some noise upstairs, and I look, and it's two little boys, twin boys from down the street, James and Jordan, and they've come up to play at the house. And so anyways, I go outside. I'm hanging outside talking to Jill for a little bit. She's doing haircuts because my wife does haircuts for us to save us money, and she does a great job. I hope it looks good. And anyways, a few minutes later, she goes, hey, will you go in the house and make sure nothing's been destroyed? Because neither of us have been in the house for a little while, and when there's little kids in the house, you kind of worry about that stuff, right? And so, of course, I walk in, and there's stuff destroyed everywhere. The dogs had destroyed stuff, not the kids. But I go upstairs, and I find these two kids playing video games by themselves in the game room with none of my kids around. And I go over to my son's door, knock on it, kind of look in real quick, make sure he's like not changing or something, and he's playing Legos by himself. And I think to myself, we've gotten hospitality almost right. You're welcome to come in, but that doesn't mean we're going to hang out with you. Unbeknownst to me, that morning, same thing had already happened with Sky. a little girl from the neighborhood had come over, and turns out after a few minutes, they weren't even playing together. And she didn't want to go home. She just wanted to be at our house and play at our house. But I got to thinking about this very question: who in my life can come to my house, just walk in and be welcomed? And I think there's times, definitely, when I've had the youth group coming over that I tell them, don't knock, just come in. And yet I'll still have these kids show up and knock and stand there in the door when it's 100 degrees outside. I'm like, I don't want to have to walk to the door, just come in. Like, you're invited to be here. You're invited to be in my house. And I think about like our ministry staff, if they were to come over and they were to just walk into my backyard or walk into my house if the door's unlocked, then that's fine. I wouldn't be bothered by it. I'd be like, hey, come on. If Andrea showed up at my house and was like, hey, I'm coming to hang out, I'd be like, okay, that's fine. In fact, there's probably many of you in here that I would be okay with you coming over and showing up to my house, and you would be welcomed for a little while. There would definitely be a time limit on that. In fact, one of the running jokes with my home group when we were meeting at my house is like, you're welcome to be at my house until I say it's time for you to go. And then I'm going to bed, and you got to leave. When I first came to Singing Oaks back in 2006, it was a short time after that I got invited over to Ron and Rock Johnson's house. Some of you will remember them. They moved to Lubbock or Amarillo. I can't remember exactly. Amarillo, thank you. And they invited me over. And I had been through enough ministry training to know that when you go to somebody's house who's invited you to their house, you accept whatever they offer. That's Luke 10. Jesus taught his disciples to be that way, that when they were invited into somebody's house, whatever was being offered, you accept. When you're a missionary, whatever's being offered, you accept. And so I sat down at the dinner table with them, and they had made shrimp pad thai. Now, I am allergic to shrimp. And so as I'm sitting there at the table and the food is coming out and there's options of things to choose, and I'm getting a little bit of everything because I want to be kind to these people who have opened up their home and who have offered me food, and they set it down on the plate in front of me, and here I am, I'm starting to eat. I'm just casually just picking the shrimp out and setting it aside and eating the rest of the food. Well, after a few minutes, Rod, the mom in the house who made all the food, looks over at my plate and goes, "You don't like shrimp?" I said, "Well, I'm actually allergic to shrimp. If I eat it, it'll probably kill me." And she was so offended. Not that I couldn't eat her food, but that she hadn't asked ahead of time if there was something that I was allergic to, because she would have made it different. It would have been chicken pad thai, which is great. And I remember that random little story in my head from 18 years ago. Last week, before we left, or 2 weeks ago, before the 4th of July week, last week's a blur, 2 weeks ago, I'm outside doing some work in my lawn, and my Muslim neighbor, Jay, super nice guy, his kids are a pair of those kids that always shows up to my house. And so I'm going to have to shut the door to my bedroom because I don't know who's in my house at any given point. And he's driving by, and as he's driving by, he sees me working in the flower bed out front, and he rolls down his window and says hi to me. And I walk over to the car, and I'm chatting with him, and I notice a bouquet of flowers sitting in the seat next to him, and I'm always looking for opportunities to try to connect something and talk about something. And so I look over and I say, "Oh, is it your anniversary? Are you taking your wife out on a date?" And he kind of looks confused for a second, then he looks over and goes, "Oh, the flowers. Yeah, I got invited over to dinner at somebody's house, and I cannot show up without something. And they didn't want me to bring any food, but I had to get something to take because I cannot show up empty-handed." And some of that's cultural for him and how he was raised, but most of it's religious. It's part of his conviction as a Muslim to honor people, and it's part of their belief of good works. They have to do works to earn their salvation, that he is doing good for somebody else. But it hit me as I kind of began to think about hospitality, as I began to think about this call that we have to show kindness and love to not only people that we are friends with, people who could show up in our house, but people who we aren't friends with. God calls us to love not just others, but all the way up to our enemies. I don't know if you've had a chance yet, and if you haven't, I don't recommend these kind of things often, but I will recommend watching the movie Inside Out 2. Y'all seen that? Some of y'all are shaking your heads if you haven't. If you haven't seen Inside Out 1, you should watch it first, just saying. But Inside Out 2 follows a character, a young schoolgirl named Riley, who's transitioning from 8th grade to high school. And what it does is it gives you a visual illustration of what I think goes on in a lot of people's minds as they deal with life. And in this story, we get to see Riley's emotions and how they control her or attempt to control her actions and help define what the movie would call is the sense of self, which is all of our life experiences, all of our interpretations of those, whether we felt good about them or bad about them, warm about them, those core memories that exist inside of us, defining and trying to define who we are. And we watch Riley, I won't give this movie away, we watch her struggle to make the transition from one part of life, 8th grade, into this new part of life, high school. And the anxiety that she deals with in navigating that transition. And some of you older folks may struggle remembering back that far, but I bet you have some core memories from that phase of life that were difficult. Some of you teenagers are in that now, transitioning maybe from high school to college or middle school to high school, or transitioning sports teams, or transitioning even at the college level about whether you're defining yourself correctly. You're dealing with all of these internal renewals that are trying to happen of who you are going to be. And in that movie, it's very creatively done to see her panic attack play out and how her emotions are wrestling to control her, and eventually she must be freed from emotional control to make decisions on her own. Christians, I think we struggle with this sometimes. When we think about this concept of loving others, we have a lot of emotions that can come into play from past experiences, from what we see in the news, from what we see on social media of things gone bad. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but social media is probably one of the worst things that's ever happened to Christianity because it promotes negative things 6 times greater of a rate than the positive ones. The news is only news because it's the exceptions to the commonality. You don't wake up in the morning and hear about, hey, somebody went and got donuts today and it was great. Doesn't make the news. You hear about somebody went to go get donuts and died in their car. Somebody went to the grocery store and bought a watermelon and came home and shared it with the family. Doesn't make the news. Somebody went to the grocery store and got shot. Makes the news. And if we're not careful, we're so influenced by the negativity that when we talk about this concept of hospitality, which we're going to read about here in Zacchaeus in a little bit, we end up having to wrestle with a lot of core emotions like anxiety and fear. It's difficult being hospitable, and equally as difficult accepting hospitality. Some of you may feel like if you accept somebody else's kindness or goodness that there might be a catch, or you might feel like you owe somebody, I have to pay them back because they were so kind to me. Others of you may be scared or worried that you might be taken advantage of if you were to give your money to somebody or to help somebody out, that they may be just trying to take advantage of you. You may, like Rot, at that one point have a fear or anxiety of having somebody over or connecting with a neighbor and doing something wrong that offends them. You may deal with pain inside of you that you feel unworthy, you feel unloved, you feel unacceptable, you feel like the toe jam in a pair of socks, like you're disgusting and something's wrong with you, and therefore don't want to risk being rejected. You may feel worthless or like a failure. Your fear of being uninteresting not having anything to talk about, your fear of being useless, your fear of being alone. It's the number one thing that we deal with in one of the most wealthiest nations ever. In a minute, we're going to see how this plays out with Zacchaeus. Most of you probably feel the fear of being harmed, of getting close to somebody and being hurt, or inviting somebody into your space, whether it's your car to give them a ride. Jill did something stupid. Years ago, and she struggled to even tell me about it. Was it Tice that was with you in the car? It was Tice. She's driving along and sees somebody on the side of the road struggling, a man, pulls her car over with my infant son in the back and helps them get in the car and gives them a ride. And then thinks about it later and goes, that was the dumbest thing. That guy could have done this. That guy could have done that. He could have done that, you know. But I'm so thankful she didn't think about all those things when the Spirit just said, do it. She thought it was dumb after the fact, but in the moment, it was the right thing to do. We struggle with that because we can let our fears and our anxieties control us instead of God's purpose. In the Bible, we see this struggle all over the place. Paul talks about it in Romans. He says, so I find the law, this is chapter 7, verse 21. So I find the law that when I want to do good, evil is present in me. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see a different law in my body, as though it is waging war with my mind and making me captive to fear and anxiety and sin. Wretched man that I am, who will rescue me from this body I'm enslaved to? Thanks be to God through Jesus Christ our Lord. So then I myself serve the law of God with my mind, but with my flesh I struggle not to serve the law of sin. Jesus in the Bible in the New Testament constantly tries to refocus our minds to see people the way he sees people. To not be afraid of people the way others are. To not be angry and enemy to everybody who wants to be an enemy to us. That a way to bring about healing in this world is to deal with our own fear and anxiety. And do things with godliness, or do things God's way at great perceived risk. When we talked last week about God sending out, or Jesus sending out the 72, he says, I send you out like sheep among wolves. He's not sugarcoating it. It is risky being a Christian. It was risky being Christ. But because of the love he had of the Father and the love we have with him, we can take great risk. Doesn't mean we won't be injured or hurt. But as a Christian, so what? So what? If we're doing it for God's sake, for God's eternal purpose, so what? That's a hard mindset to get to. Jesus talks about hospitality in the book of Matthew Matthew chapter 25, verses 31 through 46, where he describes at the end of time how he will separate sheep and goats. And when you look at the individual things that's playing out there, the sheep are the ones that have this blind hospitality. They're just helping whoever is in front of them whenever they are in front of them. That they are just doing whatever the moment calls for, not thinking about how it affects them. But the goats are more shrewd. The goats are not doing that. They're not paying attention and taking care of the need of the people around them. And God ends up condemning them. In Ezekiel, we see this play out in the story as the prophet goes back and reflects on Sodom and Gomorrah and the Jews. And he says, Sodom wasn't as bad as you because you're so inhospitable to those who are with you and the aliens who come among you. Hospitality is a tough call. I want y'all to listen to this text, and I want you to listen to this story as it's being told in a way that you may have never heard of it. This is the story of a guy named Zacchaeus. He was a wee little man, and we have sang that song, but there's so much richness to this story that might get missed. Listen to this, and starting in verse 19, it says this: Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through it. And a man was there named Zacchaeus. He was the chief tax collector and was rich. That's an important thing to distinguish here, because tax collectors were viewed by Jews as bad people. They were sellouts to the Roman Empire. They were doing the Romans' work against them. These are people that would take money from the poor in order to hoard it for themselves and pay Caesar what he was due, but keep extra money for himself. And it says this, and he was rich. Pay attention to that. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not, because he was short in stature. Now, I want you to just pause for a second. Let's put your mind into Zacchaeus' mind for just a second, because we have to do a little bit of thought process here in order to understand this short little guy. I don't know if you've ever dealt with anybody in a real high position of power who's short. I remember dealing with a cop that was short one time. It wasn't good. It didn't go well. He looked for anything and everything he could try to bust me on when I was doing stuff I shouldn't have been doing. Thank the Lord, he couldn't find anything in that moment. And I knew not to say anything. Otherwise, I might not be talking to you today. But I've thought a lot about what it might be like to be a short little man growing up in a Jewish world, growing up in a Roman world, growing up today. The bullying that might have played out as a kid, the difficulty that he might have had growing up with. I try to think, what would make this guy think that tax collecting would be a good career? Well, it would be if he was already isolated and outcast. It would be if he already felt like nobody liked him anyway. Why not be rich? This is a good opportunity and have the protection of Rome. And I can be whatever powerful person I need to be and be mean to people, take advantage of people. They bullied me, I'm going to get them back, right? That could have been the thought process of Zacchaeus. But it said that he was rich, yet he wanted to know Jesus. It says, so he ran ahead of him and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, because he was going to pass that way. Now, when Jesus came to that place, he looked up and he said to Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. Now you know why I asked that question. Who could show up at your house and you would gladly accept him? Jesus doesn't say, come to my place. He says, I'm going to your place. Uninvited. I'm going to go stay at your place. I'm not even coming over for lunch. I'm going to go stay at your place. This is a rich man. What is he doing looking for Jesus? This is a tax collector with the authority and the power of Rome behind him. What is he doing looking for Jesus? Well, I live in a rich country with rich people. And one thing I know about rich people who live in big houses, who have everything they need, is they actually are very lonely a lot of the time. They hunger and they thirst for good relationships, but often wonder if the relationships they have aren't because of the stuff they have. Hungry for true relationship, not people who just want things from them. Verse 6, so he hurried down and was welcomed by him. All who saw it began to grumble and say, he's gone to be a guest of one who is a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood there, I imagine, hearing the bullying, not figuring out, okay, I was bullied as a kid for being short, and now I'm bullied as a kid because some guy wants to, or as an adult, because some guy wants to come stay with me and bless me. And he does something insane. He stood there and said to the Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I will give to the poor. And if I have defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is the son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and save the lost." Zacchaeus recognized he was lost, recognized in everything that he had, in his wealth, in his power, he was outside of salvation. He was still missing something. And when confronted with radical hospitality, he's willing to give up half, willing to try to right the wrongs of those who have hurt him before. That kind of love impacting him in a way that you have to assume he had never been impacted by. That when Jesus entered into this world, all of these other people looked at him in disgust, frustration, resentment. He's wealthy, he's powerful, he's a crook. We can have nothing to do with him, because if we get near him and we associate with him, we might be associated with that. And if we're associated with that, we're going to lose these things that we have over here in our world. And Jesus said, "I came to seek and save the lost." And even though he looks rich and wealthy, he's actually poor in heart. Hebrews 13, the writer says, "Let mutual love continue. Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that, some have entertained angels without knowing it." So what does this mean for us today? Us Westerners living in our boxes, commuting everywhere in our boxes, talking to other people on boxes, staring at boxes day in and day out. Quite capable of pulling up to a house, driving into the house in our car, closing a door behind us and never interacting with another human. Getting our food through push buttons on our front doors and on our phones, never having to interact, whether that's our meals, getting our supplies. We have the potential to be some of the most isolated people on the planet. And the more isolated we are, the more depressed and anxious we are, the more governed by our emotions we become. But God doesn't call us to be governed by our bodies. He calls us to be governed by Him. So what can we do today? What is something small that we can be doing to help transform our minds as we move forward? Well, we've been talking about praying for the Spirit to lead, asking God to identify people in our lives that are already around us and in our presence, that we can do something with. And what are some options? Well, we can do something very simple. Showing love and kindness to somebody, looking at somebody and providing them some kind of encouragement. Maybe when it wasn't asked for, maybe when it's hard to find. We can obviously be generous. We know that generosity is a gift, and that some people are very good at being generous, and others of us need to work on it a little bit. To give away some of our time, maybe our resources, to not try to make profit on every single thing that we do. It may be to be generous with our house or our car, our money, our food. Whatever you would put "our" in front of, it's really all God's anyway, amen? And we're supposed to steward it. We aren't the king, we're the steward. We aren't the owner, we're the steward. And as we reframe our brains, we see that our anxiety drops, the body controls us a little bit less, and we're able to more freely give. We can welcome strangers in our presence. Maybe that's just having a conversation with somebody, engaging somebody in a conversation to try to encourage them. We look at Abraham in the Old Testament when the 3 strangers came up, and I recently heard this on this Beau podcast that I listened to and had never really thought about it. But Abraham's generosity and hospitality is bar none superior to everyone else. He makes almost 60 loaves of bread for these 3 people and begins to hand out just about everything he has to try to bless them when they come over. It's amazing what he does for strangers. We can serve others in small ways. Maybe it's somebody that you tip a little bit better at lunch, and you say an encouraging word to, Rather than Christians being known as the worst tippers, we could be known as the most hospitable, the most blessing-giving people there are. We can do hospitality without grumbling. We can be willing and have our hearts open, and when the opportunity comes, be positive about it. 1 Peter 4 asks us to do this, to offer hospitality to those around us without complaining about having to do it. Obviously, we can help those who are in need, whether that's somebody on the side of the road whose car's broken down, whether that's somebody in a grocery store maybe wrangling kids and can't reach something up on the top shelf. Maybe that's somebody in your neighborhood that you drive by and you think, I need to call the HOA to have them deal with their front lawn because it's disgusting. Maybe you just drive over there and say, hey, can I mow that for you or help you deal with those weeds? Fix that broken fence panel. It's a different mindset. One of the biggest ones we can do is to be a community of joy, to be a place that we can invite people to come be a part of because it's fun. We have joy. Yes, we go through difficult times, but we build each other up in those difficult times. We walk together. We support each other. We can be more humble. One of the coolest things that I do sometimes, and if I've done it to you, I'm about to tell you my secret. Don't use it against me. I'll ask people to help me with stuff, even though I'm quite capable of doing it myself. Because I want people to feel the joy of being helpful. You might have done this with your kids when they were at home and you asked them to help you cook, and your cooking took 3 times longer. But they felt so good. Look at what they were to help do. It's a really cool practice. I mean, if you really think about it, Jesus did that his whole ministry. He didn't need anybody to do anything for him. Come on. He asked people to do stuff for him, not because he was incapable, because he wanted them to experience the joy of being a giver to him. We have to be intentional about that ourselves. Sometimes doing things out of our own selfish ambition or pride, when we can be humble and allow somebody else to help us, to give us information, to bless us with something, and they walk away feeling like they've encouraged us, is some of the most hospitable thing that we can do. It doesn't matter how you spin it, you need to take a risk. And maybe God's calling you to a specific risk. Maybe it's radical. Maybe it is letting somebody come live in your home you don't know. Maybe it is pulling over on the side of the road and risking your life by helping somebody. Maybe it is accepting an invite into somebody else's home, not knowing what it looks like or what it's going to be like. You talk about memories. I have a core memory of being a kid, doing door knocking for our church growing up in town and being invited into this lady's home. And as I sat down on her couch, I could see things moving. And as I looked over at the dog, it was covered in fleas. I mean, to the point of the skin looked like it was moving. And I remember sitting there and I was looking at the other old people that were with me because I was only like 12 or 13 at the time. And I was panicked because I was like, I don't know what to do with this. And this is scary. And they just ignored it and loved. And that lady did end up coming to church with us and being blessed. We were probably the first people that had been in her home and as far as she could remember, because it was a disgusting place to be. But we can do disgusting. We can. Because love is greater than that. Love is greater than our judgment. We must take risk, whether it's just a conversation or sharing a meal. God's called you to risk. To follow Jesus is a risk. If you're not following Jesus yet and you would like to, we want to encourage you to do that. Is it a difficult road? Yes, but it's way easier than the one the world offers. And it leads to a salvation, an eternal salvation. If you don't feel like the Holy Spirit is there providing you courage and you haven't been baptized, you should be baptized. In baptism, we ask for God to give us a Holy Spirit to help us in the tough times when He puts those works of service in front of us and they're just past what we think we're capable of. The Spirit's there to take over and help us accomplish the task laid before us. You need the Spirit in you. If you've got a great story of where God has used you or has allowed somebody else to come to you and bless you, I want to hear that story. Brandon wants to hear that story. We want to spend next Sunday sharing some of those stories to encourage each other, to help us get past our fears, to help see the opportunities a little bit better that God has prepared, because God may have shown you something, and we need to hear that so we can better see the opportunities that Ephesians says have been laid before us for us to do, so that we can be God's hands and feet. We can be that blessing. We can be, as Matthew would say, the light, a city on a hill that cannot be hidden. And we can allow our light to shine so that people see our good deeds, and they don't glorify us, they glorify God in heaven. Amen? Let's praise God.